Greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Jay Singh, and I'm the founder of Publication Academy, your online training partner for higher ed career advancement and professional development. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today for this installment of our ongoing career pathway series, Exiting Academia. Today, we have a fascinating interview with Dr. Farida Habib, who successfully transitioned from completing a PhD in English into the exciting industry vertical of software development. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Over now to our amazing Publication Academy interviewer, Dr. Gertrude Nantra.
Hello everyone, Dr. G. Nantra here, and today I'm super excited to have Dr. Farida Habib with me. Welcome, Dr. Habib.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I'm so excited. Let's start with your educational background and why you chose a career outside of academia.
Okay, so story of my educational background. I was 15 years old and I had an amazing community college professor who taught me my English courses in the 10th and 11th grade at the private school that I was attending. He was inspiring, motivating, amazing, and I just was like, I need to become an English professor. This is what I want to do with my life. So everything I did from 15 years on was very sort of single-mindedly towards that goal. So I got my bachelor's at Wellesley College in English in Massachusetts. And then from there, I went straight into my PhD program in English at the University of California, Irvine. I finished in 6 years and I started actually an academic job because that's what I really wanted to do at that point. At the University of Southern California. I started as a lecturer in the writing program and eventually made my way up through associate professor before I decided to leave academia about 10 years into the career that I had established there. Wow. So I'm a little bit of a unique case because I didn't initially think that I wanted to go straight into industry. I very much wanted a tenure track job. I wanted to teach English literature, but the literature track didn't work out, even though I tried and, made it as a finalist and all of that stuff. Yeah. So the writing track is what evolved for me, and I enjoyed it at first, and then just experienced a lot of burnout in the role. The courses are mandatory, so it was a lot of singing and dancing to get students engaged and interested in the material, and it's exhausting. Yeah. Particularly as a woman of color, to be doing that at a very wealthy, predominantly white school. And I ended up having my daughter in 2018. And I thought, okay, different priorities in life. I'm now a parent. Maybe I'll be less upset by all the things that went wrong in academia for me. And actually, it was the opposite. I got more upset about them. And so I decided to pivot in 2020, actually right before the pandemic started. And I decided, given my writing background, skills in communications, that a corporate communications role would be a good fit for me. And so that is where I ended up pivoting. And I ended up landing my first role in 2021 in that space.
What an incredible story. And it's incredible because sometimes after people have been in academia for a decade, they really do begin to think they're stuck, right? I've encountered that because even though a lot of the people that I work with and have interfaced with are usually PhD students or postdocs who are just in those early career days, I find that the mid-career folks also exist and they kind of lurk in the background, and sometimes they're even unsure how all their experiences translate. So I'm actually really excited to be talking to you because this is going to be valuable for those people. Yeah. So let's move on to talking about how you, what do you do now? You said corporate communications. What does that entail? Let's start.
So corporate communications is basically the communications that a company does both externally and internally to employees around business objectives, imperatives, programs, initiatives. People who are in straight corporate communications roles tend to do the external and internal. I specialized a layer below, I sit in a corporate comms team, but I specialized a layer below into only internal communication. So that is all employee facing communications, whether it's about health benefits, DE&I initiatives, ERG communications, anything that the company needs to communicate to employees. That is what I do. And I specifically do HR communications. So those are related to people related issues, again, benefits, employee initiatives, wellness, all of that good stuff. And the reason I sort of niche down into that is because it felt to me more social justice oriented than like a marketing, a straight marketing role or a straight sort of like external comms role, which is more about like PR and, things like that. That felt too disjointed from the things that mattered to me and why I like even got a PhD in the first place. And so internal comms has been a really nice, lovely like niche where my customer is the employee, not external customers. I don't really interface with customers at all in my role. Yeah. And that felt right to me because those are the people I want to advocate for and listen to and engage with.
Fantastic. So now let's talk about how what was your mindset? Like decade in academia, what was your mindset going into this internal comms role? And how did that mindset help or maybe not help with the transition?
Yeah, I mean, making the transition was very hard. Obviously, I was on the job market at a unique time. It was the height of COVID. A lot of things were going on in the business world. Budgets were being tightened or cut. And then the summer of 2020, George Floyd's murder occurred. And suddenly, specifically DEI and DEI's sort of intersection with internal communications, employee-facing communications became very, very hot. Yeah. And so that helped me sort of move into the space a little bit easier, because before it was like, well, you're a professor. What do you know about like communicating to like regular people? I think the business world imagines that you wear like elbow patches and like don't, that you're like this very like erudite person who can't communicate to a regular audience. And having like the DE&I background and sort of having a focus in race and ethnicity studies, like in my PhD program, helped me make a case to make the transition, which was super helpful for me. In terms of just, how I brought those skills to bear, I think it was just very clear for the folks that I interviewed with, for the role that I eventually landed, that like I am truly a subject matter expert in these areas, and the kinds of communications I can produce as a result are just quite a few levels above what a person who, maybe has been working in the field for a while, but isn't, an academic or isn't a scholar or isn't, again, a subject matter expert in these areas can do. And so the work I produced was just at a level above, was clearly much more engaging and sort of real and authentic and valuable. And so I think like that piece of it really helped me like push me over into the field without without more sort of like roadblocks about like, well, what can you, what can you really do? I think the attitude about PhDs is like that they're just really out of touch and that they don't know how to communicate to regular people. And so bringing that subject matter expertise was very helpful.
Amazing. So how long did it take you? And I just love that you kind of had a perfect storm working for you. And that
yes, I did.
That definitely helped. But how long would you say it took you from the time you made a decision to work outside of academia to actually landing that first role?
So decision to landing the first role was 16 months.
Okay.
Actual like serious application networking, I'm really putting myself out there, 9 months.
Okay.
So I made a decision in January of 2020, but I was like still wrapping up the semester. I needed to finish things out. And then I ended up taking actually a leave from the university because I felt like it was too much to try to balance a job search in a new field with like the teaching responsibilities I had. And so that summer is when June of 2020 is when I really, really like made that concerted push to start applying and putting myself out there, and ended up landing the role in April of 2021. So it was about 9 months for the
Yeah.
actual, yeah.
Yeah, and that sounds, I always ask that question because a lot of people struggle with how long it takes to
Yeah.
actually break out. Because I remember for me, I was actually unemployed for almost 2 years before
Yeah.
I landed the first role. So
Yeah.
it's fairly typical. And I mean, as I talk to more people, I'm hearing varying time, lengths of time between decision and landing the actual job, but it's always a long time.
Not easy. It's not easy.
It's
Yeah.
not easy. So,
Yeah.
Farida, then let's talk a little bit about, because we talked about the time frame, but and then the circumstances under which you got this job. But let's delve a little bit into maybe how you landed the job. So, for a lot of people, you talked about networking, you talked about applying. Did you search for this job on LinkedIn? Did you tap into your network? What did you
Yeah.
do?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. For me personally, I did a couple things. I tapped my alumni association at Wellesley for advice on how to make a career pivot. I just wanted a global sense of like, what do you do when you're trying to make a career pivot? And one of the biggest pieces of advice that I got that was valuable was definitely join the professional association of whatever field you're trying to enter into, because that opens up a very like niche, concentrated network of folks that you want to get to know as you're making your career pivot. And then the other piece of advice was you may have to volunteer your time somewhere in the field you actually want to be in, because the barrier is always, well, you don't have experience in this field. We understand you have experience in your field, but
Yes.
you've never worked in a business environment. And so how do we know you're going to be good at this? And so I actually ended up doing both. So I joined the International Association of Business Communicators, which is a worldwide association. I joined my local chapter in Los Angeles. I actually networked with folks literally a week before shutdown from coronavirus in March of 2020. And I met a bunch of people in person, which was great because suddenly everything shut down right after that. So it was like just in the nick of time that I made those in-person connections. And then I just continued to just dig into that network and ask people for informational interviews, for referrals to folks that they knew. I talked to like upwards of 50 or 60 people, which was really easy because everyone was home and on Zoom. And so we just would hop on a call and I just talked to different people in different areas of corporate communications, which was super, super helpful. And then I ended up volunteering at a nonprofit that was a tech nonprofit focused on creating tools for folks to help them get the medicine and food they needed if they were immunocompromised during COVID. So it was a really like cool passion project of this Silicon Valley, like wealthy, CEO who didn't need to work and was just, was like, I want to do good in the world because I don't actually need to make money. And so he started this nonprofit, and I ended up joining that nonprofit on a volunteer basis for a good 8 or so months before I landed my first industry job. And that was invaluable because I started learning the vocabulary of the field. I started interacting with different folks in different aspects of the business. I started to understand like what are the kinds of things a person in internal comms does on a daily basis. Because when you're looking from the outside in, you can read about it and you can kind of get a sense from people, but when you're really doing the work, then you have like a lot more confidence that, okay, I can actually make this pivot and it's going to be fine. And those two things were extremely helpful for me, and I think helped accelerate my search because it ended up, as I said, being 9 months after I started like really sort of, being purposeful about it and having that on my resume that I, worked at this nonprofit. It was a, 20 to 25 hour a week commitment. was helpful to like make the case that like, okay, I can make this pivot.
So many gems in what you shared, and I want to break it down because you went through them like water, but like you but you did a lot, right?
I did a lot.
You did a lot. So the first step was getting in touch with your alumni network, and I say this always, like tap into that, because sometimes people forget when it comes to networking. People get weird about networking because of the word networking, but then they forget that you kind of already have a network if you've been to school. So like, just tap into that. That's a form of networking. Then from there, you talk about the networking piece, and then you talk about the informational interviews. And I imagine that you gathered a wealth of knowledge during that process, which is also another great gem. Another thing I tell people. So that's another layer of it. You don't have to do 50 like, Farida did, but you seem like an overachiever to me. But
I do have a PhD, so overachieving is in the genes.
Always trying to do the most. I know I'm like this too. So as soon as you said, I'm like, yep, that's something I would do. So yeah, fantastic. So then you did that, but then the part of it that I absolutely enjoyed was when you talked about putting yourself out there and actually going to do some work to give you experience, even though it was a volunteer experience. I love that for the reason of it becoming a part of your portfolio. One of the things I'm always sharing with people again is, hey, build something that proves that you can do this thing that you say you want to do, because without it, you're going to have a really hard time convincing people. And that's exactly what you did, is went to volunteer for this 20 to 25 hours. That's a significant commitment. All volunteer, and you built that experience, and that helped. Listen, if you want a playbook on career pivots, this was it. So like, it was like it's like a step-by-step playbook,
Yes.
literally. So yeah, thank you so much for that. Let's talk about transferable skills, right? So now you go from a language arts and humanities PhD, doing that type of work, teaching, doing that type of work, to working in internal comms. What are the transferable skills between the two?
Yeah, my answer is like pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Especially because internal comms touches learning and development, particularly if you're working in the HR function like I am. It touches presentation skills. You are constantly interacting with senior leaders, executives, the CEO. You have to build business cases. You have to persuade people with money to, take a certain course of action. So the presentation piece of it, the persuasion piece of it is very, very much key. Obviously, I was a professor of writing, and writing is a huge part of the job. Making a case for why something matters, making a case for investment, communicating with people about why this initiative matters, or why they should join, or why they should engage or take advantage of this benefit. So, I think like my background in rhetoric in particular was very helpful, because really what internal comms is of course it's a job that requires writing, but I really think like stakeholder management and influence is really the core of the job. And I have built such a long sort of like resume of experience of like convincing people that my course is good, that you want to take this, that you are interested in this, that this is going to help you in life. And having that skill set has been an immense benefit to me in the work that I do, because it's really about people and relationships and building relationships and persuading people to take certain courses of action. And, I've taken those like various like personality quizzes that they like make you take in the business world that no one ever takes in like academia, the core strengths and things like that. And my number one core strength is persuasion. And that I think is flattering, because that's how I perceive myself, but also I think a testament to what I had to do to get a PhD, what I had to do to become a successful professor, and what I had to do to like make a pivot. Cause like you have to convince people that you're going to be a good fit for something that you haven't spent 10 years doing. And so for me, it's been every skill that I used as a professor pretty much I've used in internal comms.
That's so great. I had a PhD student like complain to me one day that, oh my goodness, like I want to work outside of academia, but all the jobs sound boring. And I was like, well, they sound boring, but have you actually worked in them? Right. And you know, to your point about using all the skills that you've acquired on your journey to being a PhD and then a professor and everything that you did, and you're still using those skills in your current job, I think, you know, that should encourage people that usually sometimes have questions around, you know, maybe as I'm moving out of academia, I will no longer be able to have, this is the one that people would always bring up to me, like academic rigor. They're like, oh, there's no academic rigor outside of academia, or will I be able to work on my own projects, and will I be able to design my own research? And it's like those core things in academia. And I'm like, well, if that's the case, then we shouldn't be having this conversation. You should just stay,
Stay where you are. Yeah.
but if you still want to be able to use your skills minus some of the things that you may have done, and to be honest, which were also not well compensated, right? Always, then you know there is a place for you outside of the academy. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it and say that my job requires rigor. I don't think it does. I think the business world tends to be one that does not think of rigor as important. I think there's a lot of sort of emphasis on like quick decision making and making sure that we do things efficiently, which doesn't leave a lot of time for leisurely thought and strategy and considering and all of that stuff. I bring that lens to bear in my work. So in my current role, as I said, I support the HR team at my company, and I specifically support our chief people officer. And so, you know, something I'm doing for her is, you know, developing her internal communication strategy towards, you know, for the entire company and also for her team, getting her out there, making her visible, building her brand basically internally as an executive. And something that I do a lot with her is slow her down and really sort of have her think through what's our strategy for why we're communicating this? What's our rationale? What will the pushback be if we say this and employees, you know, end up deciding that they think this is actually what's happening versus what you're saying, right? And so thinking through sort of those strategic potential minefields is like a skill that I bring to the role that I think she really appreciates, because the business world has such a bias towards like action versus like contemplation and like strategy and thinking things through. So I still bring it to bear, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend it's rigorous or that it is anything like what I needed to do to develop my dissertation or any research I wrote after that, or no, like it in fact is quite the opposite. But after years of being in that world, it's been kind of a relief for me to like not be thinking so deeply about things all the time. And instead, I sort of channel that energy outside of my job, because I do have work-life balance. I'm not constantly working at my job. I don't log in on the weekends. I don't log in after hours unless there's an absolute emergency that requires my attention. My life is very much separated in a way that it never was as an academic. And so in my free time, which actually exists in my role, I spend time developing those deep thoughts and thinking through things on a deep level through like my thought leadership on LinkedIn, through the conversations I have with other people outside of the business world. I just channel it in a different way. It's not what I do for my 9 to 5, but that doesn't mean that it suddenly has disappeared from my life, because it'll always be there.
It will always be there. And I love how you use that to actually surface some of the benefits you actually get from working, choosing a career outside of academia. Some people have argued and said, but you can still kind of get that in academia. I didn't experience that. I always found that I was grading papers, I was, trying to
Yep.
the drill. I was like grading papers on the weekend. I'm like, I don't want to be doing this.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely don't have to do much of that now that I work outside of academia. So all of those benefits also are enjoyable, actually. So as we slowly bring this conversation to an end, and I've really enjoyed it, to be honest, I have. What other piece of advice would you give to somebody that's, whether they may be starting their career? Well, let's stick with mid-career folks because you've had that experience. What
Yeah.
would you tell that person?
I would tell them that you will likely experience a lot of barriers and invalidation as you try to make your career pivot. As I said, I think generally the academy does not have positive PR outside of itself. And even within itself does not necessarily have positive PR. I think the perception of folks in the academy is that, again, they're out of touch. Their heads are up in the clouds. They're not practical. They're not people who can communicate to a regular audience. And so you will be facing some of those barriers and those sorts of, stereotypes, for lack of a better term, as you're making this pivot. I think that it's really, really important that you build a network, and there are many ways to do that. If you're an introvert, you don't have to go to in-person things. You can do Zoom. If you are really, more comfortable with writing versus, oral interactions, then, just start developing your thought leadership and start getting out there on LinkedIn or developing a blog or a Substack or, a podcast, whatever you want to do to sort of start getting yourself out there and connecting with folks who are like-minded and who are also in the new field that you want to be in. So there are many ways to go about it, but it is very rare that it happens quickly. You have to be persistent. I mean, so a friend of mine actually at USC, after seeing me pivot, she was so inspired. She was like, I'm going to do it too, because she, had been unhappy in academia as well. She interviewed with one company for a technical writing role, and she landed that role. And she has been at this company since. And it is truly the unicorn experience, because every single person I know who made a pivot, whether they were mid-career or whether they're just starting out and are, trying to make a case for why, you should hire someone with a PhD versus a bachelor's, right? Coming straight out of college. Yeah. Everyone else, it's taken 9 months to, over a year for them to make the pivot. She is the rare unicorn. Do not expect that to happen to you. You're going to have to put a lot of work in. It's going to feel demoralizing. You're going to question your life choices. You're going to feel like, why did I do this? What's wrong? Why doesn't anyone understand why I would be so good at this new field I want to get into? Really, it's about persistence. And the final thing I'll say is I remember when I was studying for my qualifying exams in my PhD program, one of my qualifying exam committee members, she was just checking in with me. How's it going? How are you feeling? And I said, oh God, I'm I have to read 30,000 pages of material. I have to be an expert on this. It's really overwhelming. And she's, she just said, sweetie, she's very she was very folksy. She would always call her students sweetie and darling, and and it was adorable and not infantilizing. And she's like, sweetie, remember that this is a test of emotional endurance, not intellectual endurance. And I'm like, you're right. And that is the pivot as well.
Yeah.
You're smart. You have the skills. No one thinks you're stupid. No one thinks that you can't do this. Really? Do you have the emotional endurance to handle the transition and to make a case and to stick with it? Because that is the piece that can really wear people down and discourage them. So I would just say, keep going.
Thank you. So many wise words from Dr. Habib today. Thank you so much.
Sure.
This was a great conversation.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.